Hello, welcome to The Corner. My guest today is someone I've worked with for a number of years. We've known each other for a long time. He's a great guy. He's a lot of fun. Wonderful stories. Knows a lot of people. And is very, very passionate about a lot of things. But his latest endeavor is really something that everybody should be aware of. It's really kind of neat, but I'm going to let him talk about it. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Paul Allamby at The Corner. Paul Allamby, thank you for coming. We've known each other for, should we say how many years? A long time?
A long time,
yeah,
I think, yeah.
Yeah, well, you get younger every year. And
I don't know about that.
But you're one of the most, not only interesting people I know, probably the nicest.
That's very
that.
kind of you.
Well, it's because you showed up. But can I just get a little bit of background?
Sure.
So you were born in England?
Yeah, I was born in England, in East London. Within the sound of Bow Bells, which means I'm actually a Cockney, even though I don't have a Cockney accent anymore.
How'd you get rid of it?
Or did you studied hard devotion? No, really.
So you never talk like this.
No, I have a mother who was determined that her eldest child would not sound like the other kids in the street, and which I can tell you led to some interesting encounters for me when I was a young child, because I sounded posh, and I was surrounded by people who hated people that were posh. So
you learned how to fight?
No, I learned how to run. Really, really fast. Yeah.
Now you're the eldest of how many?
I've got a sister and two half brothers.
Wow.
So there's four of us all together.
Nice.
Yeah.
And everybody keeps in touch?
Everyone keeps in touch. They're all in the UK. You know, my sister and my brothers, we all started off as Londoners, but my family moved up to the Midlands.
Okay.
And so now I have one brother who lives in Lincoln, and which is an old cathedral city that dates back to, goodness me, 800. I think it's 850 AD is when.
That's real history.
This was a fortified, originally a Saxon city, and then later on, it was a Roman city that later on became an Anglo-Saxon city, and then became a cathedral city.
Wow.
And then I have my sister and my brother. Richard both live in a tiny little town called Long Sutton, which is famous for its church with a wooden steeple. There are very few churches in England anymore that have wooden steeples.
Well, imagine with the war that there wouldn't be very many.
Yeah.
Right?
And then I have my mother who lives in Spalding in Lincolnshire. So that's pretty much the immediate family, and of course, you know, my sister and my brothers have their own families, their own children, so I've got nieces and nephews and all that kind of thing over there, so it's kind of cool, yeah.
So now how old were you when you came to Canada?
Came to Canada when I was 18, so I came over, did my university at York.
York University?
Yeah.
Alma mater.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah. What did you study?
I was an English major. Yeah.
That's my wife and my daughter.
Really?
Yeah. York English.
And loved it, enjoyed it, met a lot of other foreign students while I was going there, which was kind of cool. So I really got to, for the first time in my life, I got to experience people from totally different cultures. You know, in East London, yeah, you had some diversity, but nothing like Toronto. When I came to Toronto, I was amazed and pleasurably amazed at the diversity in the city, and felt very welcome here, and this has been home for a long time.
Yeah, because if you want to compare Canada to the United States, I mean, the United States has always considered themselves a melting pot. And Canada's more of a salad bowl.
Yeah, that's an interesting way. I mean, I kind of look at it from the standpoint that we don't have a melting pot, we have a mosaic, right? And so it's, I hadn't encountered anything like this. I remember when I first started talking to Canadians, and I'd grown up in a society where if you, I'd been on the bus in London, and there'd be two people speaking in another language, and you'd hear somebody go up and tell them to hush because they weren't speaking English. That's the way it was when I was growing up, right? Wow. So yeah, it was. I mean, London changed obviously over the years, and when I was a kid over there, the national cuisine was nothing to write home about. Believe me, it was kind of.
Well, the British have the same philosophy for their cooking as the mafia does for killing. You can never be too dead. You can never be too cooked.
Yeah. It's changed tremendously since then. But I mean the national dish, the national, the national dish is predominantly Indian food, and some of the best Indian food in the world. And those were the people that were being told to hush when I was a child.
Wow.
Growing up, these are the people that nobody wanted living in their neighborhood. Nobody wanted around, and now you go over to England, and especially London or the Midlands, and people will talk about having a night out, having a lot to drink, and then going and having a curry.
Absolutely.
So it's funny how that kind of cultural shift, that cultural change came about.
That's really cool. Yeah. Oh, wow, that's awesome. So you're 18. You graduate from York with your English. Was it literature or English lit?
English lit, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And then after graduation, what did you decide?
Well, it wasn't so much what I decided to do. It's what I could do. And I while I was at school, I was working. I had different jobs, part-time jobs. Working in. One of them was working in a warehouse. Another one of them was doing part-time jobs. In different offices, and I ended up getting into the direct marketing business. I started off my career as working for I'm trying to remember the name of them now, but it was a company that was involved in database marketing, and worked on businesses that are shrouded in the annals of time now, but there were companies like Reader's Digest and Book of the Month Club and
Columbia House.
and Columbia House, and I have to say that I was very, very lucky that I worked with some fantastic people. I had no family here, so I had people that were enormously helpful and helped me in terms of providing me with advice and direction, and people like at the time Roger Logan and who was with a company called Watts and David Taylor, who had an agency called Taylor Tarpey, and these gentlemen, aside from helping me to advance my career, it was really about advancing my learning. And I was very involved at that time as a young man with something called the Direct Marketing Association of Toronto. I helped in the organizing committee. I just volunteered for everything. I mean, I had nothing else to do. So So when they needed a volunteer, they always knew they could count on me. So I picked people up at the airport who were speakers, and drive them downtown and drop them off, and it was whatever needed doing, but it gave me the opportunity to meet some really fantastically bright people that otherwise I probably would never have encountered, right? So it was fantastic from that standpoint. Got to know people like Mona Goldstein and Marilyn Stewart, and Alan Brodeur. And unfortunately, a lot of people, you mentioned these names today, and people won't know who the hell they are. But these were giants. These were people that were giants in the industry.
Oh my gosh! So she was like.
Well, Marilyn Stewart. We talk about the Me Movement today, but you had two of the most powerful I would say advertising, direct marketing, and marketing executives in the industry were both women.
Mm-hmm.
Marilyn Stewart at Ogilvy and Mona Goldstein at Wunderman. So it's both extraordinarily bright people, and the kind of people that really, gave back. They made. I mean, Marilyn in particular had to work really hard to get to the top. Mona had to work really hard to get to the top. And they didn't start at the top. They worked their way there.
Mona started as
a receptionist.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, and Marilyn had her own shop Marilyn started with in the business in Montreal, as did Mona, and both of them ended up in Toronto.
Oh, yeah.
So I got to work, and when I say work with, I was very junior compared to these people. I mean, these are very, very senior people. So it was really about investing the time and effort to learn and to listen, right? And to be an active listener. And having the chance to work with some amazing accounts and businesses. And the interesting thing for me during this whole period of time was that I was learning about things that that over the years I sort of took for granted. Data analytics and the whole idea of really how to gain consumer insight and how databases are built. Right. And all of this predates, of course, digital. All of this predates,
done
right?
With computers, but I mean analog.
Well, you had computers that were the size of warehouses, right?
Yeah.
And so the thing that I find really interesting about today is the issues that are being discussed today about privacy. Were issues that we had to address back then,
right?
And serious issues, because when there's that exchange of information, when people are giving you their information back then,
right.
You couldn't just go out and sell it. You had to you had to have some kind of a direct relationship and agreement between yourself and a consumer about being able to rent their information. And when you rented their information, you were only supposed to be renting. You do deals with list brokers and list managers, and I wasn't in the middle of that, but I sort of understood how that business grew. And then it hit a tipping point where when we look at what happened in the last 7 or 8 years, where people just basically started to resist and react to the fact that they felt like their privacy and their personal information was being invaded.
Do you think it was a tipping point of perhaps education and understanding of the potential ramifications of that information?
I think my understanding is a lot of this came out of the financial meltdown in the States.
Okay.
So you had companies such as big credit card companies who had used the data that was in their possession to make decisions that directly affected people's ability to, for instance, gain credit or gain access to credit, or the way that decisions were being made about which people were being marketed to and which people weren't being marketed to. Okay, so you almost had no-fly zones in the U.S. where you had something called Zip Plus 4, which was the ability to get right down to a specific address, an actual address, and there were specific zip codes that were being bypassed or repressed because marketers had specific information about those particular zones and didn't want to market inside of them. So it's basically what ended up coming out of the financial crisis, the meltdown, was there was a real reaction, a governmental reaction and a consumer reaction to push back at the amount of information the financial marketers and other marketers were able to leverage, able to use.
Now, just to give a breadth of some of the companies you worked for, goodness gracious, or how about we just talk about industries?
Yeah, well, no, I think
it's vast.
I think what's congruent to this conversation is the fact that I've really had two careers. I had a career on the service side where I was a supplier, right. And there was the time at the beginning of my career where I was working in the database marketing area. And then I went agency side, and I was working for agencies, initially running a pretty profitable large direct marketing agency, which had a large Canadian bank as its primary client. Mm-hmm. And then I had the opportunity to go client side, and I had 7.5 years of working with Rogers, and learned a tremendous amount about how to market technology. And that was at an interesting time. That was when the wireless market was really starting to arc and starting to grow, so that was a fantastic experience for me. I got to go to for a period of time work in the UK, go back to the Canada. I worked with BT over there and launched their new mobile entry. Came back to Canada, spent a little bit more time with Rogers, and then had a opportunity to work for the Blue Jays for a couple of years.
And you like baseball, so.
I do like baseball. I was told when I took the job I'd end up either loving baseball or hating it, and it was a particular lesson for me to learn that how different sports marketing is. I should say not really sports marketing. I should say any kind of entertainment marketing, right. Because it's the difference between packaged goods and passion goods, right? So people are passionate about entertainment. They're passionate about the music. They're passionate about sports in a way that they wouldn't be about let's say a cell phone or a consumer product. They can get angry about things like service, but nobody's going to really get crazy about a bag of potato chips or a can of pop, right? But if there's a perception that their team isn't being managed well, if there's a perception that the company that owns the team isn't doing a good job,
they will voice
their own opinion. So you don't. That was interesting for me. The other thing that was interesting for me was you can do a fantastic job of getting people out to a ballpark to watch a game, but of course you can't control everything. You can't control, for instance, the live performance of the product, right? Yeah. And so we had quite a few occasions where we had a relatively full ballpark, but the team wasn't playing well.
But you had enough sense to not have Anvil Day, right? Everyone gets an anvil.
I had a few lessons learned. It was actually an ego-busting experience on more than one occasion, and I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I went through it.
A lot, though. I
learned a tremendous amount. Again, wonderful group of people I had the opportunity to work with. Paul Godfrey was my boss there. I had some fantastic people, fantastic teammates that I worked with. didn't spend that much time on the baseball side of things. I don't know that I would have added any value there anyways. But I was there. We didn't have a very good team, but we did have some really engaging and interesting people that were working there while I was there. And then when I left the Blue Jays, and that was the final part of my 7.5 years with Rogers, I went back agency side, and I had a chance to, for the first time, work for a network agency. I'd worked for an independent before, and I'd never, it was a chance to work for a multinational, and that was fascinating. It was a company called Euro RCG, and it was the first time I'd worked for not just a direct marketing agency, but a digital agency. And that's when I first had the opportunity to work in the world of spirits branding. So one of our clients was Diageo, and an extraordinary company. A company that really understood how to get at and use consumer insight, a company that really understood brands, a company that had some enormous brands within its portfolio. So I had a chance to work on brands like Johnny Walker, Guinness, which was an extraordinary experience, Smirnoff, and some of their higher end single malt whiskeys too. And Crown Royal was a big Canadian brand. It was part of the portfolio. And I was working with people that a lot of them were ex-Seagram's people. So these are people that have been around the alcoholic industry for quite a while. Yeah. And I have to say that learning has a lot to do with where I am today.
Did that spark an interest in spirits?
No, not really. It was less about the fact that I was working in the spirits and beer and wine industry. It was more about the fact that I was starting to understand how brilliant this company was at positioning brands, and how brilliant they were at creating families of brands. So Johnny Walker, at the bottom end you've got red, right, and you get right up to the top and you've got blue, right? And it's getting your head wrapped around how do they do this? How do they manage simply by changing the formula, changing the packaging slightly. Managed to create these different levels that people are willing to leap to that next level. They're willing to pay $20 more between one product and another, or $30 or $40 more between one product choice and another.
Well, it sounds like there might be a little bit of passion involved with that. That people get passionate about their particular type of spirit that they enjoy, or is that fair? Or?
I think yes, but I think what was really of interest to me was how did Diageo know this? How did Diageo understand how to connect to these different audiences, to the collectors? People at the top of the category. They don't just have money; they have discernment. They're the type of people that are collecting single malts, for instance. And so I found that really interesting. And I found the fact that this was a company that was constantly looking at ways to gain more knowledge. And it was a unique situation because, there was this crossover, there was this time period where at the same time you had tobacco sponsorships going away.
Right. Well, especially in sports, in even jazz festivals. There used to be
a
jazz festival, which went away.
So there was a sense, I think, with with the big wine, spirits, and beer companies that, hey, this could happen to us one day. So let's be aware of this. Let's make sure that we're doing a better job of getting our arms around, understanding. We're starting to build direct relationships with customers. And the way we did that was by using social. And so we had some really fascinating things that we were able to do. We launched the Guinness Party of Canada, and at that particular point in time, Guinness was seen as an old man's drink. It was something. It was a flat cap drink. It was guys that you've seen those old hats that the Brits used to wear, right? And Guinness was something. It had very little appeal to young people. And it was something that you drank if you were younger once a year. You drank it. You basically drank it on St. Patrick's Day. If you weren't, right, it was tied to St. Patrick's Day. Right. But there wasn't. It was kind of how do we turn this into a product that people have an interest in again? How do we?
It's also an older brand too. It's been around from
1793. So it was like how do you make this product attractive again? How do you make it real? How do you make it viable? And Guinness came to us with this challenge, and we came up with we had a brilliant client there. He was a great guy to work with, and he had already started thinking about how he could take Guinness and turn it from being a traditional Irish product that really got big play once a year into a product that people would drink more than once, and it would become fashionable again. And so what we did was we knew that during this particular point in time, this is dating myself and dating the campaign, certainly, but Canadians had been for a long time pushing for a winter holiday, and roughly the whole idea is, can we find a time to have a winter holiday sometime in February or early March that would help us to get through the winter. And this is long before Family Day came around, right? So we basically thought, why don't we see if we can make St. Patrick's Day a national holiday? And we knew that, in fact, there had been a couple of private members' bills. And there was an MP in the House who was an Irish-Canadian MP. And we had a conversation with him, and we told him that we were backing his desire to make St. Patrick's Day a national holiday, and would he be interested in gaining our assistance? And he said yes. And so we created the Guinness Party of Canada, and if you can imagine, we had this wonderful situation where he actually, we had film of him on the Rogers channel. If you recall, Rogers used to have a channel where they covered parliamentary procedures, and so we had this guy on film saying, "Madam Speaker, I have here a document which has major support from the Guinness Party of Canada." I'm trying to remember at the time, I think it was 60,000 plus signatures that we'd gotten online.
Oh, that's great.
Okay, so these were people that were going to the site and voting to make St. Patrick's Day a national holiday. So what we managed to do is we managed to connect the brand to a thematic sort of, if you like, it was this sort of social driver that was coming through, which was, we want this national holiday. We managed to attach Guinness to that in a way that was absolutely authentic, because it was tied in with St. Patrick's Day. And as a result of that, we built this database very quickly, and we took it from that initial thrust to something that became even bigger, because once we built the party, even though we didn't get St. Patrick's Day as a holiday, unfortunately, we should probably have said we want the day after St. Patrick's Day holiday. All right, but anyhow, once we built this party and pulled it all together, this coalition, if you like, we then had the second stage, and it was, what do we do about this? And we thought, well, we've got a political party, we need ministers, so we created the Minister of Good Time, the Ministry of Good Time.
Oh, that's
And good times, and basically, we gave members the chance to essentially go out there and promote themselves to be the Minister of Good Time, and ask their friends to vote for them, which grew the size of this by I think 3 or 4 times, grew the size of the database by 3 or 4 times. So it was fantastic learning for me, and then working on Johnny Walker. We started to do. We did activations where we'd have people down at Union Station, and as consumers were coming into Union Station, we'd have these young people in kilts, young ladies in kilts, young men down at the station handing out invitations to parties. And the whole idea of the party was it was a tasting party. You had an opportunity to come and taste a particular whiskey, and you had a chance to have get a new experience. But at the same time, we were collecting data. We were collecting names. We were collecting email addresses, and so it was the first time for me in terms of really understanding. Okay, so this is how you can close the loop between a mass marketer who has been predominantly, taking their products to market using mass marketing and above the line, and understanding for the first time, okay, so this is how data and insights can directly inform the way they go to market. Right. So they were using most of the data for information purposes, for research purposes, to shape strategies and so forth. You still couldn't sell liquor online. Right. You still couldn't. I mean, there was no mail order opportunity. But what you could do is you could capture and curate experiences. You could start to create dialogues. You could have people start to feel like they were attached to the brand in a really I wouldn't say intense way, but in a
sincere, or
it was in an authentic way. Yeah. It was sort of an interesting time. So, and while I was there, I got involved with I was lucky enough to get my hands on a big piece of research that.
Sure, your balls in the shot.
That
Over a little bit. Sorry, I just realized.
well, I was going to wait until we start talking about it. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, good.
So while I was there was a big piece of research that Diageo had done, and the research was, how do they get women to start drinking more spirits? Women, and at the particular point in time, were predominantly drinking wine, and there really wasn't much of a movement towards drinking spirits. They would drink cocktails, but not really. They certainly weren't drinking whiskeys. They weren't drinking brandies and so forth. And so they started to look at the perfume industry. Diageo had looked at the perfume industry and started to look at how are they so successful at selling perfume to women. And for the perfume industry is all about packaging, right? It's all about creating extraordinary packaging, beautiful packaging. So women are sort of fall in love with the packaging first, and then also about creating a fantastic experience. So it isn't just about the packaging itself; it's what's wrapped around that. It's the if you've ever been in a retail store. And you're in the perfume section, you recognize that it was really the beginning of the experiential marketing. People talk about experiential marketing. It's, to me, and certainly to Diageo, it started there. You go into the perfume section, and before you can even get to the bottle, somebody is greeting you with an aroma and saying, smell this and see, would you like to encounter this, right? And so you've got this sense that you're stepping into an experiential environment. And so when I basically got into, I had the pleasure of finally being able to create my own product, which is Levenswater.
But honestly, it's beautiful.
So Levenswater basically, how did it come about? Well, 5.5 years ago, and
please make sure.
I'm turning the page quickly past a whole bunch of other experiences, but they're really not. They're not necessarily translatable. Before I did this, I had the opportunity to work for another agency where I had been. I had gone from working for Euro. And at Euro, we had Diageo, but we had some other wonderful opportunities to work in some other brands. So, for instance, at Euro, we launched a very small, very neglected Mexican lager beer, and an amber beer, which was called Dos Equis. And out of our New York office, we launched The Most Interesting Man in the World. Okay. And so, what was interesting about that to me, the insight that I drew from that was everybody else was zigging, and the decision was made that we should zag, right? Because, for everybody else, Mexican beer meant sun, sand, bikinis, and beer that had such an insignificant flavor and taste that you'd want to put a large slice of lime in it. It was basically very, very low alcohol and refreshing, but it was refreshing because it was cold and it had a squeeze of lime in it. And so Dos Equis was a beer that certainly didn't play there, and they didn't have a lot of money, and our geniuses in New York struck on the fact, they went and did some research, and they found out who was already drinking it. And the young guys that were drinking it were not the kind of guys that were into sports. They were kind of geeky about their beer, and they were deliberately looking for beers that weren't mainstream. They were looking for something different, and these were young guys that let's say weren't being terribly successful in the bar scene. So their big thing was, we want to be interesting. We like to be interesting. So based on that research and that insight, we created a character similar to Ernest Hemingway, who had these outrageous adventures, but was always interesting, right? This was a breakthrough for beer. To have a character that was, clearly past 50. With a wonderful narrative, wonderful stories and so forth, and very entertaining and very engaging. So that was another piece of learning for me, which was, if you want to be successful, doesn't mean that you necessarily should follow the crowd. Sometimes you do need to zig when others are zagging. Try something new, try something different. It might just work. And so I had that, and then I'd had the opportunity to work on. When I was at Havas, I had the chance to work with LVMH. We had a division out of France that worked with some very fine champagnes and worked on Louis Vuitton, worked on Hennessy. Wow. And so I learned a lot about luxe products. when you're dealing with a product like Louis Vuitton, understanding that the brand has to behave in a certain way, and you can't step out of that. You have to operate at that level, but there's an expectation from your consumer that you're going to operate within a context that gives you permission to say certain things and deliver a certain experience. And so while I was there, we also had the chance to work on some other fine bourbons and wines. And then just before I got involved in this, I also had a chance to launch an independent spirits company, which was a high-end tequila into the Canadian market. So I was gaining all of this experience. I was learning about things that from an agency perspective, I'd never encountered before, which was it isn't just about the consumer who buys your product off the shelf. It's also about the consumer who encounters your product on premise. Right. And it was also about understanding that there's a community, an on-premise community that you need to connect with too, which are, they used to call them bartenders, but now they're called mixologists, right? Yes. So it was about understanding that if you can connect to that audience, they're key influencers. They have an enormous amount of power in terms of connecting your product with your consumer. Right. And if you don't work with them and you don't embrace them and you don't engage with them, then there's probably less chance that you're going to be as successful as you could be. So it isn't just about putting it into a liquor store and pushing it. So it's about connecting with a community that can take your product and enhance it, or I should say extend it.
Right. So it's almost an extension of the experiential sort of concept with perfume, only in the context of going to a...
obviously in the perfume industry, we're not making cocktails.
No.
Okay, the cocktail is the interaction between the chemicals in your skin, and then it becomes something else, right? But I took the insights that I'd gotten from working in the industry, from understanding the perfume industry, and so right off the bat it was, we need packaging that is going to create a different dynamic, a distinct dynamic from the other products that are out there in the marketplace.
So the experience starts with the actual...
looking at it, seeing it, and so the way I got into this, I have never had the pleasure of marketing my own product before. I've always marketed other people's products, and that is both. It's been a privilege.
Well, actually, if you can touch on the genesis of the product.
Well, I was just going to say, it's been a privilege to launch other people's products over my entire life, and I've launched a lot of products that have been, selling the invisible is a lot harder. So, for instance, I'd say the hardest things I've marketed are things like financial services, right?
You're selling, for the most part, trust.
There's no tangibility, right? Yeah. So there is with a credit card, you've got a piece of plastic. It was sort of when I was when I was selling wireless services, marketing wireless services with Rogers, you're selling air, right? And you're charging for it, right? So it's tangibility is a big deal. When you finally get into a position where you've got a tangible product. Right. That's kind of cool because you're like, oh, great! I've actually got something, something tangible. But then how do you evoke trust? How do you get people to want to reach out and try the product? And so the key thing for us to do in this age was to switch on social. And the way I got started on this, it was kind of interesting. I've always I've always messed around at home. I've always been a gardener. I was an avid gardener. I inherited that from my mother. I've always cooked at home. And briefly, for a period of time, in my late 20s, I got into making wine at home. So I messed around with things like that.
Okay. Wow.
Pretty bad wine. And then I got involved in infusion, and I started infusing olive oils and vinegars, and I was using the herbs in my garden. That's essentially, I'd gotten used to doing this. I know this was a hobby, so this is something that I gave away to friends and family. And
sorry to interrupt, but where did you learn about how to infuse? Because I'm sure there's a process that you have to do that you have to follow, or is it?
No, there's a process, and so I'd grown up in a family that did this, right? We infused our own olive oils and that kind of thing, and vinegars at home.
So it's kind of passed down.
Yeah, and so I kind of grown up with an understanding of how to do it, but I started to do it. Had the house, had the garden, had the kids, had the wife, all this kind of stuff, and it was fun to do and relaxing. And what happened is, this is 5.5 years ago now. My eldest daughter, I have 3 kids. My eldest daughter is always the child that buys me the gift I didn't know I needed. You're kind of, you don't express a need for this, but suddenly it shows up. And so she had bought me the previous year. She had bought me a Chinese tea kit, and it was fantastic. It was this wonderful box full of different teas.
Oh.
And you could blend your own teas, and I've always liked tea and making tea, so this is really interesting. And then the following Christmas, she gave me a gin kit. A gin kit. And basically at that time they were only available from the UK. You couldn't get them in Canada.
I'm sorry.
Gin.
Oh, a gin kit. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
So,
I got this kit from her, and inside the gin kit there was a small container of juniper berries. Juniper being the primary flavor agent for gin. And then a small can of mystery botanicals. Now they called out about 3 or 4 of them. So coriander, licorice root, and I can't remember what the other one was that they called out. But basically you could see it was a mix of different botanicals. And 2 350 ml empty bottles with corks, and a little booklet. And that was it.
So this wasn't even online. It was actually.
It had to be. Yeah. So she gave it to me, and I was sort of, oh boy, okay. So, next thing I had to do was go out and buy a bottle of vodka, because you need an absolutely flavorless product to infuse.
Oh, gosh.
That's how gin is made, right?
Okay.
And so I went out, and it was purely by chance that I bought a bottle of potato vodka.
Well, there's potato vodka, and what else do you need vodka?
Well, most vodka is made, actually, very little potato vodka. Most vodka is made from grains.
Oh.
So from wheat, and from other grains, or from corn.
Anything that will, I guess, ferment.
Create a spirit, yeah. And so there was a particular Polish vodka that I bought.
Yeah.
And it just happened to be a potato vodka.
And this was by happenstance.
Completely by happenstance. I'm not a vodka drinker,
right.
and so I bought it, and started making gin. And for 6 months, I followed the recipe down to the T. I was determined not to kill any of my family or make them ill, right? So I followed everything down to the, and it's very different. It's very different from cooking. When you cook, you can experiment, you can mess around.
Yeah.
This was like baking. When you bake,
Right.
you cannot screw up. And if it says a half a teaspoon or a tablespoon, you move off of that, and you've got a totally different.
Right.
Or you may have something that blows up in the oven, right? So I followed the directions to the T, and nobody died, and everybody seemed to like it.
Died.
Right? And then I thought, you know what? It wasn't so much that I was getting bored. It's just that I started to get my interest. I just started to get very, very interested, and I phoned my mom in the UK and told her what I was up to, and she mentioned to me that my great grandmother, who I really didn't remember, she died when I was 6.5 years old, but she told my great grandmother had actually been in a gin palace back when she was a lot younger. Used to work in a gin palace, and in East London they used to have these ornate gin palaces.
So they would make gin in.
They would serve it. They would serve it. Yeah, the big gin, and they'd have entertainment, and they'd have they'd sort of have. Apparently, one of these gin palaces, Charlie Chaplin was once an entertainer when he was a child. His mother and his child used to get on stage, so music hall shows and this kind of stuff.
Wow.
And so, my great grandmother was half Dutch, and so we'd grown up with very, very early on with some Dutch foods, and we used to have Geneva, which is Dutch gin. And Dutch gin is Dutch gin, so just to give you a sense, the Dutch were making gin 200 years before the British even knew it existed.
You're kidding.
No. So have you heard of a phrase called Dutch courage?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so Dutch courage
comes
from the, I think it was the 30-year war. So there was a European war, like a lot of them, and this particular one, the Dutch had the British as their allies and fighting against the Spanish. And William of Orange at this particular point in time, who was about to become William IV of England, he had English soldiers fighting in Holland against the Spanish. And for the first time, the English soldiers were given this drink to drink before they went into battle, which was Geneva, which was Dutch courage. Okay, and then when it migrated to England, it was changed. They created a gin called Old Tom because they started to do things like add sweetness to it and sugar and this kind of thing. So it morphed into a different product that eventually became London Dry Gin. I mean, what you see today, the colourless. Somewhat. It's a very, very different product from Dutch gin. Dutch Geneva was lower alcohol, and it was juniper infused. It was essentially a barley wine that they were infusing. Oh. So they were infusing a barley wine, and so. Bolder colors, certainly not clear. You had a sort of natural colors, natural aromas, and they would barrel age this. Sometimes they'd barrel age a gin for 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah, they used to keep them in ceramic. They still do. You'd see gin being served from ceramic containers.
No
okay,
way.
Yeah, very, very different, an entirely different history, an entirely different narrative. So. I got incredibly interested in this because this was like not quite ancestry.com, but darn close. It's a vein in my background, in my DNA that I had to follow, right? And I knew I wasn't going to make Geneva. You can only make Geneva in Geneva in Holland. You can't make it in anywhere else in the world. It's like champagne,
right?
Okay, but I thought, what if I was to look at the different types of botanicals they use? What if I was to look at the process that they use, which is something called compounding. And so I started to go down that road, and I had some fantastic disasters. I had some things that, frankly, you wouldn't serve to people that you really, really didn't like. But it took me about 2 years to get to the point where I had perfected some recipes.
Now, was there any chemistry involved at all, where you had to sort of think about compounds and what they're...
Yeah, I mean, you've got to... I mean, I'm pretty well self-educated.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I did a lot of reading. I did a ton of research. I mean, I've been a researcher my whole life. So I did a lot of research into the kinds of things that should work. And I started to look at two things. I started to look at the idea of, why can't gins be seasonally biased the same way that beer and wine is?
Oh, okay.
Right? I thought, because the reality is you're talking about the basis of neutral spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Why couldn't you take compounds that have seasonality, or not compounds, but botanicals that have seasonality around them, to create different seasonal blends that would be consistent with the season that you're in?
Right.
So, spring, summer, fall, winter, why couldn't people make wines that are consistent with the seasons?
Right.
People do the same thing with beer now. Like craft beers there's a real seasonal bias around craft beers. You see people drinking darker beers and
right.
in colder weather, and lighter beers in warmer weather.
Right.
Why couldn't we do that with gin?
Mm.
And so I decided to go down that road, and it's interesting. The very first gin I made was a Christmas gin, which we don't have commercially available right now. And I decided to make a gin that would be like drinking A Christmas Carol. If you think about Dickens' A Christmas Carol,
Right. Yeah.
and the richness of that, and Dickens kind of invented Christmas.
See,
when you think about it.
I'm gonna just
Sure.
have to interject, but you've just sort of connected all the dots from literature that you study
Yeah.
to what you're doing now, which I think is absolutely fabulous.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
And so I kind of, when I think about, I mean, I grew up with Dickens. I had a grandfather who had a fantastic library, so I would read Dickens as a child, and it was incredibly evocative, right? I mean, he painted these wonderful pictures in your mind of what life was like then, and so plums and figs and and cinnamon and nutmeg and cloves, all those things, and I'm thinking, gosh, could I do that? Could I make a gin like that? And so I remember a friend of mine who was essentially my very first partner, Andy Wright, had been my boss before at Euro, and he had I think he had something like 14 years working on the Diageo business. Wow. So he really understood the business. And he had just landed a big job here up in Canada. He'd come in, and he was the CEO of Air Miles. So I was getting together with him for the first time. I hadn't seen him in years. And I think it was it must have been his birthday. And I wanted to give him a present. And so I gave him a bottle of my gin. And I didn't know what the heck he was going to do. This is one of these guys that has everything, right? So it's like, what do you give to somebody that has everything? You give them something they can't buy.
Right.
And so I gave it to him, and I didn't expect anything to come out of it other than I was hoping that he wouldn't get ill. Anyhow, he liked it. He came back to me and actually asked me if I could make some more.
Wow.
And I said no.
You said no.
Yeah, because it was a hobby. I wasn't doing this commercially, okay. Right? This was fun, and the idea that I would have to make something to order, which means that I'd have to make another bottle that would be the same as the bottle I gave him. I wasn't,
Oh, so
I wasn't. I was still. Can I do that? Yeah. Essentially, I would make 2 bottles at a time. I'd make 2.
So we're not talking
350.
You're not using vats here. You're using.
I was making it at home. I was making it in my kitchen, right? I was making it for family and friends. So anyhow, he said, would you mind? So I made a couple more bottles, and I don't know who he gave it to. He came back and he said, have you thought about doing something with this commercially? And I said, no, not at all. And he said, well, I think we've got something here.
Wow, that's wonderful.
So the next thing, got together with another friend of mine who had, I think it was just 18 months before, Mitchell Shaw. He and some of his other partners had sold their company, which was Mill Street Brewery, to Interbrew for, I think, $191 million, right?
Wow.
So he was, he was happy. I mean, he made quite a bit of money, and he'd done very, very well, but he missed it. He missed, Mill Street was in his blood. He'd grown that to be this huge company, this huge business. And so those were my first two partners. I had this wonderful connection with these two guys, where their passion now was driving the project. It wasn't just me; they were driving it. And
how did that make you feel that they enjoyed it?
It was extraordinary. It was, and especially Mitchell, who hated gin. I mean, he said gin for him was his grandmother's drink.
Oh, wow.
And then he tasted my gin and loved it. Right.
Now, do you mix it, or do you have it sort of straight?
It's entirely up to the consumer.
Okay.
This can be drunk with just some ice and a slice of citrus and a little bit of water, or it can be drunk with tonic, or it can be drunk in a bunch of different cocktails.
Okay.
But the intention is this is a gin that doesn't make you wrinkle your nose. Some people's issue with gin, with the old style of gin, is all they can smell and all they can taste is juniper. And juniper, has that pine nose to it, and it can be very off-putting for some people. I wanted to make a gin that would be very well balanced. How is it made, right? How is it different? So remember what I talked about before about the perfume industry,
right?
Okay. So what I recognized that was going to be incredibly important was for the aromatics not to be an outcome. So generally in the spirits business in particular, the way a spirit smells is an outcome. It's not designed in.
Oh, I see.
Okay, so your primary focus is you're going to make a product that's going to taste great.
Right.
Okay, and the aroma is kind of an outcome. It is what it is. So you're smelling. If it's bourbon,
right,
you've got the smoke that essentially came out of the wood. It came off the barrel, right? So about 70%. Between 50 to 70% of the flavor, color, and aroma of whiskey or bourbon is the wood, it's the barrel. That's what you're getting. And so I didn't want an outcome. I wanted to design the aromatics. I wanted the aromatics to be an important part of the experience. Again, going back to what I've learned from the perfume industry. So I wanted people to take that cork out and smell it, and when he smelt it, that it would be the second phase of the experience. The first phase of the experience being the packaging in the bottle, but then when they took that cork out and they smelt it and they picked up the aromatics, it would take them somewhere. And so spring, when you take that cork out, you suddenly are in that space that is the spring. You've got that sort of. You're smelling maybe fresh grass or citrus or flowers. Wonderful. The first bloom of flowers. Lavender and so forth. So the aromatics were designed, and so when you're making a compound gin, typically gin, the way that certainly London dry gin is made. Is you have a still and a pipe still or a pot still, and typically what you're doing is as you're distilling the alcohol, you have your botanicals sitting on trays, And as the steam comes down through the tray in the pipe still, it picks up the flavor agents.
Gotcha.
And then when you distill again, what happens is the natural colors come out. Most gin, if you just have juniper and a few other botanicals in, most gin would be a pale yellow color. Would absolutely not be clear. It's clear because they redistill it. Okay. And the downside of that is, the downside is what you end up with is a clear product with very subtle flavoring agents. And the reason that the juniper tends to be so predominant with a lot of these gins is because the other flavoring agents, the other botanicals, don't capture enough, aren't captured enough to balance out against the juniper. So my design around this was to make the gin the way they were making it back in Holland in the 16th century or 17th century, which was.
Is that why it's orange?
It's not orange. This is actually a rose color.
A rose color. I said that because of course
the
Dutch.
It's a rose color, and so tulips aren't orange.
No, but
there's a bunch of different colors.
Orange, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the national flag.
Yes,
but the tulips are a whole bunch of different colors.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
So there were a couple of different things that I wanted to achieve here. One was natural colors, natural aromatics, but designed aromatics, and then that when they tasted the product, it wasn't what they were smelling. I don't think anybody wants to drink perfume. If they're given the opportunity, right? You might want to smell it, but you don't want to taste it. And so it was, how do I do this? And the only way to do this was to infuse it, and it was very similar to tea making. So I was making tea with alcohol. So what I would do is I would use a hop sack, and I'd have 4 sets of infusions. So the first infusion would be the initial infusion, which was to make a classic gin, if you like.
So it's like an infusion bag.
Yes, right.
Wow.
And then take that out, filter, and then the next infusion would go in, and the next infusion would be, to lift the flavor, take it to a new place with a bunch of botanicals that you normally wouldn't necessarily see in gin. And then the third infusion was for color.
Wow.
And then the fourth infusion was for aromatics.
So now you're doing this still at your table?
No, this is now being done commercially.
Oh, commercially,
right?
okay.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
When I did it at home, I used small infusion bags, right? And the whole idea of this was that by the time you came through this, what you had was depth. You had an experience which was not the first note, but there was the first note on your tongue, and then the very last note, as you were finishing the drink, and the whole idea of this was how do I evoke spring, and how do I evoke spring in the most diverse city in the world? And it struck me, I shop all the time at Kensington Market, and I thought I'm going to basically lean on what the Dutch did. And the Dutch still are a large merchant trading country. That they were huge explorers, one of the earliest nations to explore the Far East and India and places like Indonesia and the Philippines. So I started to look at, I don't want to be like every other Canadian gin that is predominantly, it's either copying the British or having a Canadian identity, which means that they're only going to use Canadian botanicals.
Gotcha.
We live in the most diverse city in the world. And I thought, why shouldn't our gin reflect that? So I started to experiment with different botanicals that I was getting from Kensington Market. And so this gin has things like telecherry peppers from southern India, It's got saffron from Spain.
So now the choice of those, though, was it random or was it
No,
just...
no.
Okay.
I mean, it took a long time to get to this recipe, right?
Gotcha.
It took a couple of years. So the whole idea was create a spring-like experience, but don't limit it to, okay, so a spring-like experience means whatever's growing in your back garden. Because if you live in Toronto, what's growing in your back garden may have come from 1,000 miles away.
Right.
When we cook here, when we eat here, when we experience life here,
Right.
we're experiencing the world. We have the choice to experience the world.
Yeah,
Some people don't choose not to do that,
Right.
but if I want to have brunch, I go for dim sum, right? And so I was deliberately looking for botanicals that would evoke not just a spring-like experience, but a spring-like experience from a Toronto-based standpoint.
Right.
And so you've got 34 botanicals that are from all over the world, and that really speak to the diversity and mix of cultures that we have here, right? Each one of the gins is operating on the same basis. So, for instance, we have the spring gin, but we have a harvest gin that is made from. This is the base for this is potatoes.
Okay.
The harvest gin, the base is sweet potatoes and pumpkins. So
wow.
so each gin, the whole idea of the gins, they're seasonal, but they're quite separate. They're quite different. The colors are always natural, and the whole idea of this is that you are going to get an experience. This is not just going to be some clear spirit that you pour in a glass and then you drown in orange juice or sweet, very, very sweet cordials like tonic water. This is something that if you're going to add something to it, you should add something to it that would naturally enhance or amplify something that's already in here. So there's rosemary in here, there's Labrador tea in here. There are a lot of different elements, and you can go down a route of savory,
Right.
because there's fennel and licorice root, or you could go down a route of fruity, because there's blackberry leaves, there's apple, and then you've got other fruits in there like you've got blood orange and you've got lemon. Or you can go down a route where you sort of say, I want something more herbaceous, and there's rosemary in here, and as I said, there's
so that's all in the spring?
all in the spring product, yeah. So it's very, very complex, deliberately complex, and the complexity, I think, is hopefully something that's going to bring people back to it again and again, because it's interesting. They could literally design their own experience based on which route they want to go down, and we're going to produce products for all the other seasons too. So we'll have a chance.
Wow.
Winter, we haven't yet started bottling, but winter has been sitting. My gin has been sitting in 14-year-old whiskey barrels for a year now.
Yeah, 'cause, I mean, there's a lot of forward plan, which again, that sort of connects the dots with direct marketing, because direct marketing was all about forward planning.
All about planning, yes.
Yeah, and that's so it fits yet again.
And so the winter gin, which I'll be pouring in about 2 weeks, that's been sitting in whiskey barrels.
So pouring meaning that you're going to be bottling it?
Bottling it.
Okay, gotcha.
So it's been sitting in. We bought 2 14-year-old whiskey barrels from Scotland, and then took our winter gin, the ingredients, and rested them in the 2 whiskey barrels, and they've been in those whiskey barrels now for a year, and we're about to bottle them.
So how big is a whiskey barrel?
Each whiskey barrel is 400
liters.
400 liters. So
It's 800 liters.
800 liters. We're going to be bottling of the winter gin. Yeah.
So 750 bottle, or is it a full liter bottle?
750.
So that's almost. Oh my gosh.
So we're basically, again, it's I'm very lucky with my partners. You know, I've got 5 partners who are very passionate about this, have been tremendously supportive about this, and we've had great success. We just learned a week ago that we had won Best Canadian Compound Gin at the World Gin Awards.
Holy cow! Now, did you fly out or pick up an award, or did you actually?
One of my partners did.
Oh, nice.
We have we've won Best Non-European Compound Gin by
Gin
Guide.
So typically Canadian. Everyone should know about this.
Yeah,
I'm serious.
And we just and we also won at the SIP Awards, which is out of California. We won a double gold and silver. We won a double gold for bottle design and branding, and a silver for the actual product itself, the actual liquid. So we've had fantastic success on the world stage. We've now won 7 awards, global awards.
Wow.
This is out of Europe, out of Hong Kong,
Right.
out of the States.
Out of Hong Kong.
Yes, we were in the World Spirit Awards in Hong Kong. And great success in Quebec. The SAQ have been carrying our products since the fall.
So you can't get it in Ontario yet?
You can buy it online from us. We
Okay.
have, if you go to www.levenswater.com,
We'll put that
you can order it online. We're licensed by LCBO, but you can't buy it through the LCBO yet.
Gotcha.
We are on sale in about, I'm trying to think now, we're on sale in 17 or 18 bars and restaurants in Toronto. We're on sale in 28 bars and restaurants in Quebec.
Oh, jeez.
So, and recently, Nordstrom, which has bars and restaurants in all of their stores, decided to list us.
Nice.
So you can now walk into a Nordstrom and enjoy some Levenswater.
Wow. Well, as everyone should. But honestly, this is so typical Canadian. You're winning awards globally.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, we tend not to promote ourselves very well.
No, we don't. No.
And I think that's got to change. So we'll do the best that we can.
Thank you. I appreciate
Well,
it.
listen, I'm so glad you came out. I'm just trying to look at the time here because it's you have a 1 o'clock.
I have 1 o'clock. Yeah.
So the timing is just perfect. So maybe this is a good place to end it. But
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And hopefully you'll come back.
Yes.
For
Yeah.
a recap.
Yeah. We found out with this gin that we came out tops in the regional awards, right? But they're automatically taking this gin now and putting it in for the World Award for top compound gin in the
Where is
world.
that held?
In London.
London.
Yeah. So the first award we won in London.
So you hold on. So that's like you won in their.
Yeah.
You won in their house.
Oh, yeah.
You won in their barn, and you beat.
Oh yeah, we're not tiptoeing into this. We're going into global awards. We've only entered global awards because we're proud. It's a Canadian product that we're proud of.
You need a larger maple leaf on the back.
And we think, you know what? They pick up on it pretty fast. They Levenswater, by the way, the name.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that, but
the name means in Dutch. It means water of life.
Leaving. Okay, gotcha. Nice.
So-
That's very apropos.
Yeah, I hope so.
That's really great. So holy cow. So we don't have time for it, but when you do come back, because you have to come back, there is going to be. I have a challenge for my guests.
Sure.
So there is the indoor golf long drive. There is the parking challenge with a radio-controlled car. There is bubble hockey.
Okay.
Or there's laps on a slot car track, which we have here, which is actually is modeled after Spa, which is in Belgium. Sorry.
Okay.
But the great thing about the bubble hockey, though, is that if you win, I donate $100 to your favorite charity. If I win, you have to put $1 in the swear jar, and then we basically videotape you swearing for as long as you can, as loud as you can.
That wouldn't go very well.
I don't think I've ever really heard you swear.
Maybe if you win, you'll get a bottle of Levenswater.
Well, bubble hockey isn't fair. But the other stuff is kind of like Top Gear.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
John.
Thank
I
you.
hope
Thank
that
you
was.
so much.
I hope that was interesting.
Oh, are you kidding? Like it flew by. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, I did.
Cool.
Yeah, I do love the product. I'm proud of it. I'm proud of it.
Well, you should also mention that's a crystal bottle.
Yeah, it's crystal flint. It's finest crystal flint bottle, and you know one of the reasons, by the way, that we decided to print right on the bottle is very often I'll get into bars, small bars, where there isn't a lot of room.
Mm-hmm.
So they just turn the bottle sideways.
Well, I was going to say,
But it's the Levenswater.
But it also is a good, again, connecting the dots with perfume bottles, because
Yeah.
most perfume bottles have printing on them.
Yes.
So that they can be displayed in wherever someone is putting
Yeah, we
themselves
want
together.
people. We want people to see the liquid.
Right.
There's nothing interesting about clear liquids. When you
Well,
look
yeah.
at perfumes,
Right.
they're never clear.
No, they always have a tint.
They always have a color,
Right.
right? And so the natural color from this comes from rose hips and beets.
Beets.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I'm using entirely natural botanicals. Everything is natural. You know, beets are from here, the potatoes are from here, but everything else is from everywhere else.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, so you try and support local growers as much as you can.
Yeah. I mean, it's where it makes sense. You
Right.
know, sweet potatoes, you cannot buy sweet potatoes locally. So.
Seriously?
No, sweet potatoes are imported, or come from the States, or they come from South America, or they come from the Caribbean. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
between the chemistry, the biology, the literature,
Yeah.
everything
Yeah.
has come together in a bottle.
Well, yeah, and I
That's
really
awesome.
do. I really do look at this like tea making, except I'm making tea and alcohol. That's all.
Okay.
You know, when I say have a cup of tea, I say have a glass of gin, and it's it's very, very, very similar. And you know, with tea, the timing is important, right? Because if you
steep it too long or not long enough,
if you steep it too long, it's acrid. You don't want to taste it. It's too strong. You know, it's not pleasant.
Right.
If you don't steep it long enough, then you're not going to get enough flavor. You know, very similar to making a compound gin. I have to manage the amount of time that each wave of botanicals is in the gin.
especially when you're doing it on a large scale.
Yeah, we're producing now 1,000 liters at a time. So when we make this, we'll make it in batches of
So that's
1,000
about
liters.
1,100 bottles, 1,200 bottles.
Yeah.
Okay. Fantastic.
So it's
Well, next
been
time, because it's
I've got to
we'll
go.
do later in
unfortunately.
the day, and then we'll sample some product on time.
Yes, we will.
Thanks.
Great seeing you, my friend.
Thank you.
Ah.